The Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership deal, or TTIP, is moving on towards the 14th round of negotiations, amid nonstop protests across the EU against it. Today, a leak published by a German paper and further verified by other reputable European news outlets like The Guardian say this confirms their worst fears for the deal, especially when it comes to GMOs in their food. RT's Manila Chan explains.
Earlier today, environmental group Greenpeace leaked 248 pages of documents from the secretive U.S.-EU TTIP deal. They say it's about two-thirds of the entire negotiations. Prior to the leak, there has been existing distrust of the deal since it emerged last fall, with many Europeans taking part in massive protests all over the EU. The 28-member state, along with Washington, have been aggressively pushing this deal for completion before Obama leaves office. But with this new document leak surfacing, environmentalists, trade unions, and concerned citizens alike now say it's worse than they imagined. The deal essentially wipes out existing European trade laws with the U.S., opting from their risk avoidance techniques for a more American-style risk management mode of operation. And this is what is making many Europeans very uncomfortable. Europeans are a very risk-averse people, and this new policy would deregulate much of what is already in place, anything from tariffs on goods to the U.S. and vice versa, to labeling of foods between the two unions. Now, this is perhaps where environmentalists and wine aficionados line up.
Our initial assessment from these chapters is that the EU, in relation to environmental protection, public health, product standards that are relevant for consumers, has a fairly bad position, and the United States is much worse.
Yeah, that's right. Wine lovers in America and Europe are causing quite a stir because of this. There were 16 of 18 agricultural pages dedicated solely to wine. Take this, for example, page 12, Article 8, paragraph 3 states, quote, "Neither party shall require that processes, treatments, or techniques used in winemaking be identified on the label." So why does this matter? Because buried in the 248 pages are items specific to Europe taking on importing American GMO foods and other GMO farm goods. This paves the way for big farm groups like Monsanto to impose similar rules on farmers in the EU as they have on American farmers for decades. And this includes the vineyards in Europe, with potential that they would be allowed to produce GMO wine and not have to disclose that on the label. Wine exports from Europe, as you might imagine, constitute almost 80% of all the wine produced and shared around the world. They are, of course, the leading wine producer for American consumption as well. This draws to mind the recent bill on Capitol Hill known as the DARK Act. Very similar proposals on the table here in the European deal. So this is where the folks at Greenpeace are most apprehensive, because the trade deal isn't just about Mercedes sending us more cars and the U.S. lowering trade tariffs on them, but also what the Europeans have to take from America in return, which right now appears to be a lot of American food goods. In Washington, Manila Chan, RT.
President Obama's trip to Germany is in part to promote the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, a trade deal he says will create millions of jobs. On Saturday, a reported 35,000 protesters of the agreement disagreed. Protesters held up signs and hung banners on the sides of buildings to make their opinion of the TTIP known. The proposed deal between the U.S. and the EU would create the largest free trade area on the planet and make it easier for the U.S. and countries in the EU to get into each other's markets. According to NBC, the protest was organized by trade unions, environmental activists, and church groups that are worried about environmental and legal standards. Unlike in the U.S., where anti-trade rhetoric is heavily tied to jobs being lost, anti-TTIP protesters in Germany are focused on more than the economy. One expert put it this way, quote, "Criticism in Germany has often focused on an increase in what is perceived as undue corporate influence, a feared lack of democratic control." For Newsy, I'm Eugene Daniels.